had great fun working for Saturday Night Magazine because I'd phone the editor and I'd say, Paul, you know, I've got this idea, I want to go and ride a freight train through northern BC and see what happens. I'd say, great, and go for it, keep track of your expenses, and we'll pay you $5,000. Or I want to hang out with arson investigators for a month. Great, sounds good, do it. That period of Canadian magazine work was a real pleasure, and I got to go all over the place, to the war in Kosovo and write about the Hurt Locker guys, the guys who do bombs and mines and booby traps, and hang out with them, and did a lot of interesting things on somebody else's dime, and met some wonderful people and wrote what I think were some really interesting stories.
Jake is always a surprise. His physical presence, his voice, his intelligence, and the kinds of stories that he's about to tell you are always a surprise.
He's a person who always seems to be moving forward. Even when he's standing still, you have the sense of a person who's going forward.
He is a wonderful, adventurous individual. He's a great father, and he's turned his life into something that he is really proud of, which I think everyone should do. So.
He's a rarity in the modern writing world, out of a place like Winnipeg. He has made his livelihood for probably about 30 years now entirely as a freelance writer.
He looks a bit like a wizard or something.
One of the things that has to be admired about Jake is his ability to generate the income that he needs whilst writing what he wants to write.
I love John Updike's old saying. He's one of my heroes, one of my literary heroes, and he said that serious writing is best thought of as a hobby. Literature is best thought of as a hobby. And the reason I like that is, as he points out, he said there's something about the term professional writer that has a certain grimy feel to it. And so I think that writing you do for love, for dedication, you shouldn't really worry too much about whether or not you're making much money from it. So that leaves you with the issue, well then how am I going to make a living? Now, most writers, they either teach or they have day jobs of some kind. Some of them are lawyers, some of them, you know, are, well, all kinds of things. And so what I do is I write for a living, but I write things that are more commercial than my literary interests. So for example, I'll do magazine articles. I've done a lot of script work over the years. I've done some travel writing, a fair amount of travel writing actually. So often what I'll do is in the morning I'll write for love, and in the afternoon I'll write for money.
But he's published novels, he's published children's books, he's published memoir, he's published nonfiction, he's an award-winning magazine writer. And I know that from time to time he also does corporate work.
I doubt that there are very many writers in Canada who have the same facility to move from one type of writing to another and just keep moving forward.
I've done 9 books that are real books, and 6 of them are fiction of one kind or another, short story collections and novels, and the last 3 have been nonfiction.
He's always traveling. He took me with him all the time until I was in university, and then it was harder for me to leave at the spur of the moment.
You know, in detective stories, the way the narrator is this sort of portal for the story, and is therefore invisible the way doors are when you're in the middle of them. And so he places himself in his own stories, and he makes use of his own life.
I think he is the guy in the books. I think in a book like Houseboat Chronicles, you have a very strong sense of an indomitable spirit, someone with a real love of life, someone with a tremendous curiosity and energy.
He has an amazing lifestyle. It's a lifestyle that I think everyone would like to have. I would.
If you talk to Jake, of course, he'll joke about how this allows him to sleep in till noon and never have to wear a tie, etc., which is true. But there's no question that in a market like Winnipeg, which is small, you don't make a living as being a writer unless you work darn hard.
I do work hard, but I actually don't think of it as work because I enjoy it most of the time.
He's a very disciplined worker. He's up at 6 in the morning and working until 8 p.m. every night, and he's very strict and he's very dedicated, and I admire that about him.
I'm always involved in commercial projects of one kind or another. My daughter's going into law school, someone has to pick up the tab, you know. There's a lot of real things out there that are not secondary, but they're of extreme importance. It's really important for me to be a functioning, productive dad, and to be and to have a comfortable place to live and to travel and to enjoy life. I'll get up early before it's light, and without doing anything other than maybe having a quick yogurt and a cup of tea, I'll write for maybe 2 hours. And then I'll knock off and I'll do some stretching and some exercises, and I'll make a proper breakfast, and by then the phone's ringing and there's emails and that sort of thing. That's when I'll sort of turn to the business of being a writer. And for the rest of the day, my ass belongs to somebody else.
He knows everybody, and he stays friends with people. So he's one of those people that collects friends and looks after us all.
He does it with tremendous energy and tremendous personality. Clearly a man of whom it can properly be said that he's very lovable.
He grew up, I think, on Mulvey Street in Fort Rouge. But if you've read his great memoir, Houseboat Chronicles, you'll know that he discovered the outdoors early in life.
My parents got a cottage, bought a piece of land out at the lake and started building a cottage. And that was my religious transformation, because I thought, this is a discovery for me. It was like Saul on the road to Damascus. I was knocked off my ass and on my ass. And so this was the world of nature, and it wasn't butterflies flitting around and birdsong, and it wasn't the Walt Disney World of nature. It was the scary world of thunderstorms and deep lakes that you could drown in, and bears coming in the nighttime. And that, as a little boy, that was the world I was much more interested in anyway.
As a writer, Jake is very eclectic. He's, I guess, you would be able to infer from his publications that what he really loves is the outdoors. He likes fishing. He likes the Canadian Shield country. He likes messing around in boats.
I've traveled a lot over the years, and I really love the Caribbean, and I love Mexico, and I love Cuba, and I love the Pacific Ocean, and northern British Columbia, and all those places. So it's not like I just write about the Northern Ontario Shield country, but it's where it's where I've come from, and where I've learned a lot of lessons about the kind of basic elements of life, and how writing should be basically come out of that.
Long before Jacques Cartier bumbled his way along the rocky shores of the St. Lawrence, the village of Monackey was already established. When I walked along the town at night, I was intrigued by the obscure but undeniable fact that this was an ancient community, older than London, older than Rome. You could walk along canoe portage trails a few miles out of town and crunch your way across 1,000-year-old pottery shards. Just north of here, you could climb a high ridge and find a row of mossy boulders arranged in the shape of a gigantic snake. Why was that snake here? I'd met archaeologists who'd told me that this settlement was probably about 10,000 years old.
It takes a lot of courage. Obviously, he puts himself in these wilderness situations. One of the greatest things I've ever read by anybody, it should be in the New Yorker, was his story about hunting alligators in Florida in a boat at night.
Once we get to the marshy parts of the lake, we growl along at a slow troll, playing a floodlight back and forth in search of the red cigarettes that are a drifting alligator's eyes. The large ones are wise to boats, and they tend to submerge when we're a good distance away. Juvenile alligators are stunned by the light, and not too bright in the first place, and they float motionless while we cruise up. Lying on the front deck of the boat, I reach into the water and grab them around the thorax. It's like lifting a toddler, albeit an insane one, with jaws like hedge clippers.
I've always been interested in how people behave when they're outside the envelope of normal societal standards and behavior. So at times over the years I've written about the wilderness, where all bets tend to be off. I've written about crime, same thing really. It's just like the edge of society inside the city rather than outside the city. And I've done some war reporting and that sort of thing. And all of those things tend to have the same general conditions, which is all bets are off. Society has no writ here. Now let's see what happens.
He's funny, he's urbane and droll, and not only self-deprecating, but other-deprecating. You can't get too highfalutin with Jake. He's sort of a satirist, a gentle, gentle satirist.
I went to university and I was going to be an English professor, and because I thought being an English professor meant that you actually studied English literature, and it was an understandable mistake, but I was completely wrong on that account. I quit university and I went off to the woods, and I lived in Monaco and I worked as a fishing guide and subsisted on various part-time jobs. I did a bit of substitute teaching. I worked in a jail at night, which was a fun job, believe it or not. And I wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. And then by the time I was in my late 20s, I had a couple of unpublished novels and a number of short stories and some magazine stories, and suddenly everything just started falling into place. I sold a magazine story about working as a fishing guide, which I've been doing for years. It's the first piece I ever sold for money. The editor was the one who suggested I write the story about it. I said, sure, I'd love to. So I wrote it. It took me about 3 hours. I sent it in. I didn't hear back from her, Toronto Magazine, and I thought, well, of course, they probably didn't like it. And then I contacted her about 3 weeks later, and I said, did you get a chance to look at it? She said, oh yeah, that's great. We're sending you $1,000 in the mail. Will that do? And I thought, yeah, that'll be fine, because it took me 3 hours to write it. So I took that and a few other small checks, stuck them in the bank, and I thought what I'll do is I'll quit doing any kind of work other than writing, and I'll just try it out for 3 months. And I've been doing it ever since.
Most recently, he published a nonfiction book about grizzly bears in North America, which took him all across the North.
In writing both fiction and nonfiction, you're relying upon a blend of memory and experience, stuff that has already happened, and then stuff that you have to make happen. And you have to throw yourself out into the real world and go places and expose yourself to the kind of the belt sander of existence and see what happens when the point starts to sharpen up, because as I say, things always turn out differently than you expect.
He grabbed my head in his jaws, shook me, and pulled my scalp half off. Then he grabbed my arm and shook me the way a dog shakes a rat. Then he threw me into the bushes and walked away. It was all over in 90 seconds. Did you play dead? In my opinion, all that advice they give you about whether to play dead or fight back is useless. When a bear attacks you, it's like being hit by a train. You have no time to do anything. You're not even thinking. You're just being thrown all over the place. Why do you think he attacked you? He didn't say.
He's an adventurer. He has the greatest memory of anyone. I think that's one of the things that makes him such a good storyteller.
I'd say he's one of the children of Ernest Hemingway.
Steve Earle says you need an inquiring mind and a fearless heart, and I can't imagine it being better described. The work I do for love is what I think of as the date I came to the dance with as a very young person, when I was working for free. And I actually didn't want to submit any work because I was afraid somebody would tell me it was lousy, and then that would take away the one last thing that was really special for me in my life. So I was the pure writer in the garret in those days. That was, as I say, the person I came to the dance with. And I want to go home with that person at the end of the night. And I want to feel like I've retained a connection to that writer who's working with no attachment to outcome. Some writers say, oh, you can't plan a story. And other writers say, well, I know the story from the first sentence. I think John Irving said, I write the end of the story first. Whatever works. You discover the story in the writing of it. And then, of course, when you get to the end of the story, you have to go back and do it again because you haven't really come to understand the story until you're about 3/4 of the way through it. By that time, you've laid down a lot of false leads and dead ends earlier in the story. So it's a process of writing everything at least twice, sometimes 5 times. The daily reward is the feeling of creating life under your fingertips, literally, maybe like a potter would do, or like a sculptor would do. It's really for me, it's really a physical process. You're hitting keys and you're making words. And if you hook the words together in an artful sequence, you feel like you've created something that's almost alive. Writing is an awful lot of work. Literary writing is an awful lot of work. And so I sometimes wonder, why am I doing this? And I think, when you think of the excitement of getting to know somebody you don't know very well, somebody you find to be an intriguing person. So to enter their world and exchange points of view and that sort of thing is one of the most exciting things we can do as people. And I think of literary writing as a kind of an analog for that, because what you're doing is creating a kind of a parallel world that has many of the features of the real world, and that as much as possible, when I'm writing literature, I'm trying to recreate certain elements of the world that I know, but that are foreign to me. So there's a process of discovery from my point of view. I'm exploring this new realm in this story, and I hope there's that element for the readers as well. So I think the reward is actually, it's not so much lessons, but it's just the lessons you learn from living every day, or the lessons you might learn from a journey to a foreign country or something like that. It's hard to put your finger on what you get out of that, but it definitely makes your life richer, and it raises as many questions as it answers, and it adds a certain complexity to life, which I think is what it's all about. The question you hear from people all the time is, so do you jump out of bed inspired at 1 in the morning? No, I mean, you get up in the morning and eat your breakfast and you go to work. And you bang away all day long. In a whole morning, you might get off one good sentence amongst 93 other sentences. And but that one sentence is enough. To write a good sentence is a hell of a thing. The key to survival is always adaptability and adapting to changing conditions. And creatures that adapt survive, and creatures that don't adapt disappear. Even to this day, I feel very much like an opportunistic, an omnivore, trotting down the fence line, hoping that something's going to pop out of the weeds in a few minutes, and it's going to be a cold night, and there's no safety net, there's no backup. You're out there in the pure Darwinian world, but that's great, because if you can stay sharp, you can survive, and if you're not sharp, what's the point?